Our first session this evening on law and law enforcement. I'm very pleased to have a very distinguished set of panelists whom I'd like to briefly introduce in the order in which they're seated. First, Ms. Flavia Agnes is a very well-known women's rights lawyer. She is a pioneer of the women's movement. She has worked consistently on issues of gender and law reforms. She's the co-founder of MAJLIS, which is a legal and cultural resource center. Her primary engagement has been to provide quality legal services to women and children. Welcome, Ms. Agnes. Our second speaker is also very distinguished and very well known, Mr. Colin Gonzalez. He's the founder of the Human Rights Law Network, one of India's leading public interest law groups. He's a graduate of the IIT Bombay. Mr. Gonzalez started his professional life as a civil engineer, but was drawn into the field of law through his work with the unions in Bombay. He commenced formal legal study in 1979 and litigated his first case while still in law school on behalf of 5,000 workers locked out of their jobs. Welcome, Mr. Gonzalez. Our third speaker is Ms. Shazia Ilmi. Shazia Ilmi is an Indian politician and social activist. She was a well-noted TV journalist and TV anchor in Star News before joining social and political activities. She was the leading spokesperson for the India Against Corruption movement, led by the veteran activist Anna Hazare in 2011 and 2012, and led a vibrant and highly visible media campaign for an anti-corruption bill, popularly known as the Lokpal Bill, which captured the imagination of millions of Indians and became a widespread protest across the nation. She has been declared Admi party candidate from the RK Puram constituency for the upcoming Delhi Vidhan Sabha 2013 elections. Welcome, Shazia. And last but not least, our speaker, Ms. Diane Rosenfeld, lecturer on law and director of the Gender Violence Program, Harvard Law School. She teaches courses on Title IX, Gender Violence, Law and Social Justice, and Theories of Sexual Coercion. In addition to teaching, she directs the Gender Violence Program and supervises students in conducting cutting-edge legal policy analysis on issues such as prevention of domestic violence, homicide, addressing campus sexual assault, and new law enforcement approaches to address sex trafficking. Welcome, Diane. We'd like to proceed. We've asked each of the speakers to give a presentation of approximately 10 minutes. Then we'll open up the floor to discussion. It's meant to be an interactive discussion, and we'll proceed with questions and answers after that. Please, Ms. Agnes.
Thank you, Aparna. I'm very happy to be here. Making this small presentation. Actually, there are very few people who have been in the whole anti-rape law reform campaign from the Mathura till the 2013. And I'm one of the few who have been consistently with the issue, along with the issue of domestic violence, which is also much more personal for me. I'm a lawyer, and we have a group of women lawyers who help to take women to court, mainly in the area of matrimonial law. But more recently, we've started also a victim support program or survivor support program, not because of the Delhi gang rape case, 2 years before. At that time, it did not have validity or legitimacy, but in some sense, post-December, issue of rape is in the forefront, issue of domestic violence is little receded. So there's a lot of focus on our work, and hence, and also this conference is an outcome of that. So I'm happy to be able to say whatever I have to say. Whatever I say may not be with the grain, and you will excuse me for that because it comes from my ground level experience and from my courage of conviction. It's a little difficult to go against the grain. But I think in this forum, I think it's a good opportunity to speak whatever I really feel very strongly. In 1980, when Mathura case, I don't know, many of you were not born that time, many of you were not aware of the Mathura case, but for us, that's a big catalyst for even articulating the word rape. And that time it was a Supreme Court ruling, and the girl who was raped was 16 years, almost minor, And issue was whether she was minor or not. And she was raped by policemen on duty while she was taken to the police station. And first the Sessions Court and later the Supreme Court held that since there were no marks of injury, she cannot be raped because consent indicates or non-consent indicates injury. So for a long time we've been with this concept that rape means a struggle, and the struggle must, and penetration, and a complete penetration at that. And from Mathura onwards, and we got this amendment, stringent punishment, burden of proof shifted in selective situations of custodial rape, etc., etc. Actually, ground level, nothing changed. All of us campaigners felt very happy. We had moved the state machinery, we had moved the criminal legal system. We were a handful of people protesting, 50 people here and there, labeled as feminists and homebreakers, etc., etc. But it was a great moment for us because we were able to change this huge, massive structure called IPC, which was framed in 1860, to this extent. And all of us went back, had our own things to do. Some of us stayed with issues, some of us went on to other issues. Many more issues became more fashionable in the coming years and decades. And rape somehow receded in the background. Till now. So-called Nirbhaya, which I refuse to call the word Nirbhaya, and I'll come to that later because she has a name, she has an identity before a vagina was torn apart by these brutes. So my question here, the first point I would like to say is this issue was discussed, it was happened when the parliament was in session. Next day there was discussion, everybody was anguished. And we have Sushma Swaraj saying here, you know what happens for a girl who is raped, she becomes zinda lash. She is as good as a dead person. And here we were, for zinda lash, that means she is alive but she's like a corpse. She's dead. That means when we say marriage, I like Justice Saith's point that everything is related to marriage. Presumption being, and it is there in our judgments, vagina is the most precious possession of an Indian woman. And if the vagina is violated, you are doomed for life because then you can't get married. Or judges give compensation because now she's been violated. Now she would need more money for dowry because nobody is going to marry her. Now the link to marriage and virginity, sexuality, agency, and a state worse than death. Now again in the 2012-13 protest, consistently it was said that a rape is worse than death, so we need death penalty. Anybody rapes must be, it's like murder, it's like worse than murder, worse than murder. We have hundreds of women or thousands of women who are killed in their own homes as for dowry or for any other reason. But we never think marriage is a very dangerous terrain for my daughter to enter into a totally alien space. But here, a moving bus can be danger, school can be danger, anything can be danger, and I will protect my child from that state worse than death by keeping her inside, by protecting her even more till she's married. So this whole question of marriage and virginity, according to me, even the 2013 amendment or the entire report to a certain extent tries to address it, but it doesn't really address it to that extent. So I'm glad when Judge said that, you know, we need to question marriage. So what is it about rape that puts, and vaginal penetration, that puts it in a pedestal for a woman's being? And unless you question that, cannot come to anything flowing from there. Then if she is violated, we cannot use her name. It was because of the way the media was intruding in a person's privacy, in a way the courtrooms became a humiliating place where the media reporters would be there. In the judgment, that girl's name would be there for many years, that the name should not be mentioned in the media, etc., etc. But today, about this girl, we know everything about her. We know her inside, we know her outside, we know her friend, grandmother, grandfather, village, everything. And she's dead. Yet, for us, it still becomes important to have this word Nirbhaya Even though her father, mother says, yeah, you are creating a fund, you're making a law in her name, please use the name. But for us, she does not exist as a person. For all of us, even the enlightened ones, she doesn't exist as a person till her vagina was violated. But then we have another girl in Mumbai called Pallavi Purkaista, who is the daughter of 2 IAS officers, and the watchman went into her house soon after and attempted to rape. And she struggled, whatever, and she died. But since her vagina was never violated, we can use her name. Because the chastity is never violated. Or we can have Acid, Preeti Rati and other people whose faces demolished and then they die. We can use their name, we can put their pictures. But this woman then becomes for us, all of us collectively create a image of something worse possible, worse than death, whatever possible, a gruesome kind of violation. I just want to give you here 2 examples of more recent cases. One is a allegation of rape by a very established Parsi doctor. Parsi is important here to mention. Whose father, Sunamala, was a very famous gynecologist, with the result that not only all Parsi babies, but also other babies would be born through Dr. Sunamala or his children, 8 children, family members, everybody is a doctor or gynecologist. The rape happened. Now there are a lot of stories. While when he had to be arrested, he was allowed to come in his own car. And he never reached the police station and he escaped at the traffic light and was allowed to escape. After that, he absconded. Then a case was filed, FIR, etc., etc. When the FIR was filed, anticipatory bail. Anticipatory bail in a rape case, unheard of. Vacation judge. When the judge said, no, I cannot do this, you have to surrender, sessions judge. Went to High Court, vacation bail. High Court said, no, this is premature to come to High Court, so you go back and see what Sessions Court actually does. Because appeal is not allowed in the intervening period, but allowed. Court reopens, Parsi judge. Parsi lawyer, very famous, Abad Panda, whose mother is a Parsi. Both Session Court and the High Court full of Parsi community people, including Parsi lawyers, everything Parsi. Anticipatory bail granted. On the other side is Admi party supporting this girl. Matter is now in the Supreme Court. Rohingya Nariman will be for the accused person. And I don't know, Admi party whom they will take. And Supreme Court must decide that whether and then all the time argument for one case, don't generalize. Don't generalize because, the courts cannot be biased. Courts have to be fair. So my concern here when Mr. Gopal Subramaniam, Mr. Soli Sorabji, etc. are giving lecture. No. I am saying that while we say, of course, justice must be done, fair play, whatever, but then when we talk here, we don't bring all those intricacies here of class, of caste, of other power structures. But on the other hand, in this gang rape case, the power structures were very clear. The boys were down there, and there was this whole screeching for death penalty. But we have this actor, what's his name? I forgot. Shiny Ahuja. Maid servant. Cement stains found on the bedsheet. What he says initially is that such a thing never took place at all. His wife comes on TV. TV gives them lots of space to say how nice man he is, how handsome man is, how nice couple they make, husband and wife, etc. Woman being maid servant. There was no victim support program, and our program actually starts as a consequence of this. This woman is left on her own. Her uncle compromises with this guy, and I believe they given money for her dowry, for her marriage expenses. The girl turns hostile. But Sessions Court convicts. Entire Bombay elite saying, how can the judge actually do this? And he changes his version. He says, firstly, there was no sex at all, and then he says the sex was consensual. And on that discrepancy, in fact, this and whatever forensic evidence, he gets a conviction. Matter is in before the High Court, and let's see what the High Court will do, even after this entire campaign. So my question is, I have many things to say, but I have only 10 minutes, so I thought I'll just flag these issues. I have on each of them, age versus agency, like 16 to 18. What happens? What happens when a lower caste or different community boy falls in love with a girl? And what do the parents do? And how they voice rape charges? And then the guy, if he doesn't have any legal support, legal aid, etc., is convicted for 7 years. But somebody like Shaini Ahuja or Dr. Sunabala, I do not know whether Sunabala did it. Sunabala did not do, but the fair trial process itself gets hampered at the beginning, at the bail stage itself. And what the court says, he can go for 12 hours to give his blood test, etc., etc. No need for arrest. So who gets arrested? Who does not get arrested? Who gets convicted? Who does not get convicted? And what's the class structure of a society? What is the class structure of our judiciary? What's the whole element? And what's the public opinion makers? And where are they situated? Where will they talk and where will they not talk? And how will they talk? And whose behalf they will talk? Now, I just want to say 2 or 3 things. We have, so a rape figure for Bombay is 230, 240 per year. Of course, it differentiates each time. Each time we ask for a figure, we get a different figure because each time they recalculate, there's no system at all. A conviction rate as per NCRB is 26%, but according to me, it's not even 10%. Because there was no way of finding what is our conviction rate because there's no system at all in place, and that I can vouch for. And I've asked for the last 2 years everyone to say, how do you calculate? And in Bombay, in a city like Bombay, I'm not talking about Marathwada or Bihar, I'm talking about a city like Bombay, IT city, financial capital of Mumbai. Now in a situation like this, what are the cases that come? A lot of cases called promise of marriage cases. What are these promise of marriage cases? Recently, Bombay High Court has said an adult woman giving consent to sex cannot be rape and the promise of marriage. Then there are called elopement cases, the type I told you before. But a third one that is coming up in our research is very, very scary, where you have a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, and she comes into the domain of the law because she has missed her periods. She gets pain in the stomach. She doesn't know why she has missed her periods. When she's tested, she's pregnant. Then she gives a name, that's so-and-so. I was raped by so-and-so. Things are never so black and white in our society, I want to tell you this. And not one DNA report has matched so far. Is there something wrong with DNA? Is there something wrong with a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl? She is pregnant. That's the only reality. And she's put in a shelter home. And she has delivered and given a child in adoption because by the time the pregnancy is detected, she's 5.5, 6 months pregnant and a little child. I went to one of these shelter homes and I didn't sleep for next 3 days because you have all these little children in uniform, like any other school children, all 8 and 9 months pregnant. And you cannot imagine what a sight it is. This is the society that we live in. Raped by father, raped by uncle, raped by whoever, maybe boyfriend, maybe there was a boyfriend and a father, whatever. Today when we make the law, we have no idea of the reality. We are sitting in our ivory towers, including activists, including lawmakers, including opinion makers, including judges, and are making laws. I don't know for who and I don't know for what. And into that context, if I had time, I would have expanded marital rape and how it would pan out. But that will require another 5 minutes, so I'll refrain from doing so. But we have flagged many issues that need to be looked into and examined from a very different perspective. And today we don't have an answer at all, including whole gender neutrality, why male, female, whose violation, what kind of violation. We need to really look much more deeply. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Agnes. So, Mr. Gonzalez, if you would say a few words. Yeah.
I want to say a few words, very rapid fire, on the law enforcement implementation of the law. And the huge challenges that we face after this wonderful report has come out and the Criminal Law Amendment Act 13 has been passed. One would have thought that with such a lovely report, that with the anger on the streets and with the coalescing of the two, the anger in civil society and an erudite committee looking at the changes in the law and so on, one would have thought that the attitudes of the police would change somewhat. And almost immediately after the report came out and the discussions took place on television, almost immediately after that, I got 20 cases from Haryana of rape, of juvenile and young women. And it was such an amazing thing. I took it to the Supreme Court immediately, and it was in the context of this whole committee report and the interviews that you all were giving. And the Supreme Court admitted the petition immediately and said, we'll have a look at this. And I looked at it a bit carefully. I went to Haryana, I met the girls. It was quite an eye-opener to talk to young girls in school who were raped. And I saw the Haryana police sabotage case after case. For example, they would ask the mother of the girl to go and wash the clothes immediately. And then after a week, they would make a pretense of seizing the clothes and sending it to the forensic lab, and it would come back, no semen stains. Or they have a speciality in Haryana called the lie detector laboratories, where the accused volunteer to go for lie detector tests. And all the results say that the accused are speaking the truth. And you have the Kap Panchayats that are called immediately to tell the girls that they ought not to proceed with their case. And in all cases where the girls persist, young girls, schoolgirls, tremendously strong, wonderful girls, in all cases where they say, no, we won't change our story, social economic boycott and eviction from the village and so on. And in all cases, the police find, the medical reports find, habituated to sexual intercourse. 9 standard girls, 10 standard girls, in Haryana, in a traditional society like Haryana, habituated to sexual. And it struck me that as far as Haryana, which is just across the border from Delhi, the whole change in the law had really no impact on the police force at all.
Not even in Mumbai.
But don't get me wrong. I don't mean it doesn't have. I believe the things that happened on television and the movement and so on and the change in the law. Right? It's an important first step. I believe, just as Verma said, it was just the first step, and we have many more battles to fight. It's a very important first step. So I don't mean to undermine that in any way. And it's a tremendous change, I think, at least in the minds of judges and so on, that we ought to take this issue seriously. Whether they will or will not is a separate issue, but I believe some change has taken place. Some kind of fundamental change has taken place. But anyway, in Haryana at least, it didn't appear to be so. Then you have the police commissioner who was quite aghast that anyone should say that he should resign because of a rape in Delhi. And he said, if you sack a police commissioner every time there's a rape, you'll have to sack a police commissioner every day. And I thought to myself, exactly. Exactly. It's just when you sack a police commissioner, catch him by the collar and sack him and sack him and sack him. It's only then will the lesson go down into society that, well, every police commissioner is accountable, and a woman is not like, theft of a car or theft of a motorcycle, It's not as commonplace as that. Or as simple as that to sort of take it lightly. Sack the police commissioner. Or the Bombay additional commissioner who had the audacity to say that the sex education in school is the reason why, rapes take place, because of sex education in school. And I believe now he's promoted. He's got a promotion now. And I thought to myself how important it would have been, for a movement of the kind. Yeah. He's become commissioner now.
No, commissioner became DGP.
Yeah. How important it is to catch these kind of guys by their collar and really engage in rough stuff with them and pull them out on the streets and sack them. So it requires a different approach. How do we enforce the law? When at the highest level, and with full backing from all MLAs and MPs who don't want police reform at all, how do we get these kind of magnificent changes in the law, which are today more like a beacon light of what can be done and should be done and how society ought to work? It's just a kind of a sign of how things should be. How can we make it actually something of the present? Police reform. But like all things in India, we use magnificent words, but we don't really follow that up with real energy and change and fundamental radical change. We took the same paramilitary force that the police had in the UK or the Irish police force. We took those examples and we have a paramilitary police force in India. But our colonial masters went through 3 reforms in the Police Act in the UK. The UK Act, the Amended Act, the Amended Act, the Amended Act. And today you have, relative to India at least, a much more civilized police force, you know, in the UK than you have in India. And in India, the main case on police reform in our Supreme Court is a case by a police officer. It's incredible. It's incredible. By a police officer who has very, very retrogressive views on human rights, awful views on. I heard him in a Manipur meeting where he said if there should be rivers of blood, namely civil society blood, if there should be rivers of blood, so be it. And he's there, the champion of police reform in the Supreme Court. And there are no interveners from civil society. We don't realize that it's to do with gender. It's to do with Dalits. It's to do with Muslims who are, you know, locked up all the. And there's no solidarity in that sense, you know, a common identification that, look, as far as enforcement is concerned, as long as the police that is supposed to enforce the law remains the main breaker of the law in this country, that this police force is largely populated, I would say, taking a conservative guess, 50% of our police force are criminals in uniform. That we identify this problem first and say, what do we do to get rid of these criminals who are just happening to wear police uniforms? What do we do to get rid of these guys? And how do we pose the question? When I did with Arnab as a TV anchor in one show, he was very harsh with me. And he said, you know, you're very idealistic and this is very long-term and all. I said, it may be long-term. But unless we change this police force and make it a police force that is amenable, you know, to upholding dignity of individuals, what does the change in the law mean? We have allies, I must say, we have allies in our battle for this fundamental change, and we must go to curb violence against women. We must move outside the boundaries of gender. We have allies in Dalits who have faced atrocities by the police, by the upper caste police for decades. And they have very powerful experiences of how the police are, and they have their own ideas on police reform. Muslims in our country have repeated experiences of a communal police force. So it's a police force which is sexist. It's a police force which is casteist. It's a police force which is communal. And Muslims suffer this day in and day out when they face the wrath of the police. So we have allies in our struggle for fundamental change in the police, for police reform and so on. And somehow we have to take the battle for enforcement to a different level, where we come with allies outside. It's not really outside gender, I'm just putting it very crudely, but it's with allies who have traditionally fought the police for reform and have the same or similar ideas that we have. I think that the kind of opposition you will get from politicians, MPs and MLAs to police reform will be much more than the kind of opposition that they gave you to the report that Justice Verma came out with, the Justice Verma Committee came out with. Politicians are astute. They know there's a huge gap in India between the law and the implementation of the law. So even if laws are made which they find they're not very comfortable with these kind of laws and so on, even if those laws are made, they know that the implementation of the law will take decades and they can sabotage the implementation of the law. But police reform touches them. Because the moment you have a professional independent police force, half our politicians will be behind bars. They fear police reform and they prefer the present system where the police are actually the security guards of the rich and famous and of corporations and politicians and so on. So we are actually at a threshold of a struggle of huge proportions. I frankly feel that even to succeed is almost impossible because the odds against us are very, very, very high. But I would say that we could take perhaps South Africa as an example of some kind of successful police reform, where in '94, after the apartheid regime was abolished and the black regime came into power, they were faced with this task of getting rid of all these racist officers and all these torturers and so on and build a new police force. It's not that they've succeeded. There's still problems. But institutional torture has reduced quite a bit. Racism in the police force has gone down. A lot of officers were sacked. And I want to end by making the suggestion that I make in my own idealistic and completely unrealistic fashion. When they asked me, what do you want? I said, I want this. I want 50% of our police force sacked. I want the people of India, because they can identify them. In every police station, the people around the police station will identify the officers who beat people, the officers who ridicule women, the officers who treat Dalits badly, the officers who are anti-Muslim. They can identify them. So we want accountability for policemen, identify the culprits and get rid of them. And I've said, again in my completely unrealistic way, that I believe you have women, Muslims, Dalits, you have so many educated, unemployed in this country, who want to serve the nation, who want to, perhaps build a new India and get them into the police force. How do we do this? I have no idea at all. I haven't the foggiest idea how we do it. But I believe we must pose the question at this level, that we want fundamental change as far as enforcement is concerned. And to some extent, the dream that we live, again and again and again, that changes in the law means changes in society. That illusion, that maya, we must break from that. And we must say, all of us who are, particularly us who are lawyers and law practitioners, I think to some extent we perpetuate that myth that a change in the law will mean a change in society. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It's just the first step, but it doesn't necessarily translate into fundamental change on the ground. And I believe the kind of things that are happening in Haryana are taking place throughout the country. And the savagery of this police force must be curtailed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez. Ms. Ilmi, we would like to address us.
Thank you so much. So much has been said, and I totally agree with what Colin said. Even the recommendations that we made to Justice Verma were firmly rooted in police reforms, but I think Colin has elaborated on those. Before I go further, I wanted to comment on what Flavia said, that, we live in our own ivory towers. I have brought with me somebody who's sitting behind me. Where is Santosh? Now, Santosh is the uncle of Gudiya. Just after the Nirbhaya rape, was a 5-year-old, there's another rape reported. And the police refused to file an FIR in that case. And Santosh is here, and I can take his name. His brother was not able to come because Gudiya is undergoing a 3rd surgery. Now, instead of me saying anything about this, I would much rather you all meet with Santosh later and talk to him as to what an ordinary person goes through. Now, they found a little child missing, their daughter missing. They went straight to the cop station to find out. They were not even allowed in. They were rebuked and thrown out. Because Aam Admi Party, we had some posters on electricity, inflated bills of electricity. They happened to see the number, and they called up that number. Some volunteers, some young kids got together and decided to find out what was happening. By the time they got to their family and they realized that it was already a day was already passed and nothing was done to locate this little child. I'm calling her Gudiya. Gudiya is not a real name, obviously. I will not disclose it. The cops even offered a bribe of 2,000 rupees because they realized that this matter will go out of hand. Now, this is despite having the law in place. This is despite all of us knowing that an FIR has to be reported. Now, it is so unfortunate that they refused. They wanted Gudiya to be located. And after 2 days, Gudiya was found. And even then, how the cops actually slapped some of the volunteers who were there. And all the politicians had to say was that these people were there creating a ruckus in the hospital. Now, imagine what happens. The girl was found in such a brutalized condition. She was, instead of taking her to the best hospital at that point of time, because she was really in a very sad state, they took her in the most ordinary hospital without any basic facilities. Again, there had to be a whole, almost like an andolan, for people to take it seriously, to take her there. Unless it became a media story, nobody would take it seriously. Now the question is, why do people have to go on the streets, fight, call the media to get anything done? Why are laws so different? And as far as law enforcement is concerned, I think, in the Nirbhaya Andolan saw everybody shouting and screaming at Raisina Hill, and I was one of them, kill those guys, hang them. But what people don't realize is that, if you start with any kind of, the first interface, let's say, a citizen has to go through, in reporting a sexual crime is the police, is the registration of FIR. And if that is not taken care of, if the right protocol is not set there in terms of it being videographed, it being recorded, it being completely made non-bailable, and so if that is not taken care of, and in the backlog things are not checked, and there are lots of reforms that we have actually made recommendations of, which are here. But what I'm saying is that what's the point of having all the laws in place when they're not implemented? This is a prime case of that. Because police reforms have been touched upon, I will talk about judicial reforms and also legislative reforms. The Law Commission reforms recommendations are known to everybody. I don't know why nothing has been done about it. I'm so glad for Justice Verma's report, and it was speedy and timely and covered so many aspects. But even legislative reforms, and we are of the firm view that if any candidate has had any record of sexual violence or case registered against him, he should not be allowed to contest for any public office whatsoever. It's going to be a huge, whether it's councillors' elections, corporators, MLAs or MPs whatsoever. So this is very important. And also, if police complaint authority is concerned, there has to be an independent body where complaints against policemen can also be made, because this is a very, if you think of it, it's like the CBI, they report to the political masters. So what do? You go back and forth. Now here, if there's a case against a constable, there's an in custody rape, or any kind of harassment at the police station, where do you go? There is nowhere to go. It's amazing that right now, today in Meerut, 2 days back, a girl was raped and she was burned. In Moradabad, another rape has happened, and these people have nowhere to go. So Aam Admi volunteers, they're just regular citizens. So they're just helping out. Now, why should a fledgling party or civil activists have to do this? Where do people go to report a case of sexual violence or rape? So this is, I don't know what we've come to, as a society. And it says a lot for us. And when we are made fun of and people mock us for not respecting institutions and democracy and rule of law, we wonder as to what we are talking about. Police as an institution has really, lost its rationale. And not a single party has shown any commitment to police reforms, which I think is the order of the day. And also, I would like to talk about reporting done by media. If you just follow how it's reported, the whole approach of the survivor versus victim. We victimize the woman again and again, like the Zinda Lash story. Every politician, the kind of remarks that we heard, one can't help but cringe at the repressive nature of those remarks. So this is coming from our lawmakers. Look at the law enforcers. So what hope is there really, for us to actually look at a system where we question this very depraved patriarchy? And also, I think if we talk about rape, sexual violence, sexual assault, it cannot be discussed in isolation without discussing feticide, dowry deaths, because this is the overall patriarchy which really puts women in a subservient position. And women themselves are part of the patriarchal culture. So this is a deeper question really. But it has to start not just with law, but with its implementation. And at least a basic, I don't know what it takes, whether it's I don't even know whether we can actually tell politicians what to do, because if you believe that a woman she can't wear certain clothes to step out, how do you tell a police commissioner he shouldn't be saying it? How do you tell the judge in the Shanti Mukund case, where a nurse was raped and she was blinded by the rapist, when the judge himself asked the rape survivor, I will not call her victim, whether she would like to marry the rapist? And the question was, and I was reporting, I was in Star News at that point of time, and I was shocked, because the judge there was to hear a hearing on rape. And it was not about a proposal of marriage by the rapist. So it's like, the entire identity of woman lies in a intact hymen and nothing else. And this whole cocktail that we see of consumerism along with feudalism, it has led to such a depraved, state of affairs that it's very, very important to address. I chose R.K. Puram as a constituency especially because Nirbhaya was picked up from Munirka, that same place. Ravidas camp, where the rapists hail from, are there. And if you go, and this is a deeper question that I want to bring to you. You know, when I go there, and I go there often, you see the dehumanized condition where people, how people live. Nobody can condone the brutality, the bestiality that this girl went through. But we have to address very basic concerns as to how human beings live in India. What kind of breeding grounds we are creating of unrest, of ignorance, of violence. And what a depraved society we're becoming. If you go there when people beat each other up for water, where marital rape is something that is not even thought of, because every woman is probably raped, where she doesn't know what sexual pleasure really means, because there is no idea of sex, equating sex with pleasure for a woman. So I think it's a long, road to freedom of that kind. And I really would like all of you to meet with Santosh here and ask him what he went through when the little daughter of his, which is actually his niece, but he fought because his brother is actually very shy, so he fought the whole case. And he right from Sonia Gandhi to Sushma Swaraj to Kiran Walia to every politician you can think of came to him and assured him of all the help possible on television. And mind you, this is a big case. Imagine what happens to so many cases. So our own understanding of rape, that it happens to girls who wear certain kind of clothes, in dark neighborhoods, they happen in homes. Incest is common. It's done by people we know. Rape is an act of power, not of passion. When all the news channels talks about havas ka shikar, havas is lust. Lust is different from bestiality. We must distinguish. When you say izzat lutli, I mean, izzat to uski gayi jisne ye kaam kiya hai. So equating a woman's body and a virginity with all that she has is actually doing the biggest disservice, because her body might be violated, but there's so much else that she stands for. And I really think it's time where women say that we are just not, tits and ass, but we are kidneys, bladder, brain, lungs too. I think it's time that we take cognizance of the fact that we're just not a body, there's so much more. And this totally, this, as I said, the feudalism and most overt religiosity coupled with this consumerism of the worst kind that we see has led to this depravity. And unless and until we address the basic issues, we will get nowhere. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Ilmi. Thank you for those remarks. Diane, if I can ask you to speak.
Good evening. I am humbled to be here and really honored to be among all of you. And I was very honored to have submitted and worked with the Verma Committee. And this report, you have your Bible with you? Was unlike anything that I've ever seen from the government in the United States. Many things that I want to say, but I've been doing this work for 2 decades, and all I know is that female-female alliances where we stand up together across all boundaries, all man-made boundaries that we have, and say, you can't do this to me, you can't do this to my sister, and everybody's my sister. We are all, as women, vulnerable in a particular way. And laws around the world are made in patriarchal societies. And patriarchies treat women and sexual violence in a particular way. Like Justice Sethi was saying, we were property. That's how men made the laws around women. Who has the right to access her? Who has the right to protect her? Does she have any right to protect herself? And that's what we are up against. Institutions are not institutions, they are made up of people. We can change who is in our institutions. We have democracies. So there is hope. Okay. The Verma Committee report was such amazing work and so deep and intelligent, and I really cannot commend you both and Justice Verma highly enough for your work. I am in awe of that report. It showed such a deep understanding of every possible dimension of this problem. So any way that we can help collaborate to create pressure, to maintain visibility of the problem, to help in any way that we can to work on implementation of the vision that is embraced and set forth in that report, we will do. And that was the spirit of this conference and of the Harvard Gender Violence Project. We do not have the answers in the United States. We're working on it. But working together, we can maybe make some noise and create different types of pressure. In the United States, the strongest thing that we have besides sexual harassment laws that were spearheaded by Professor Catherine McKinnon in the 80s, we had the Violence Against Women Act in 1994. And that was the first time that the government recognized violence against women as something substantially different from regular violence, which means male-on-male violence. And there was a sexual dimension to violence against women that was recognized. And this act took 4 years for women's groups to work with legislators and judges and people across the board to get this passed. And it was a beautiful thing when it got passed. When President Clinton was in office, one of the first things that he did was to create the Violence Against Women Office at the U.S. Department of Justice. And I had the honor of being the first senior counsel to that office, which was a dream job for me. It was kind of for me like being president. So what did we do with this? It was great, and you think that the U.S. is so great. But actually,
We don't really think so.
yeah, but people think that women in the U.S. have great rights. That's what I mean. That we have more rights. You don't think so? You're right. And everything that you said was like identical in the United States, like in the 80s, but I can't go into that too much. But the idea of non-consent equals injury, and now we're finally understanding what affirmative consent might look like. But at the highest levels of our law, the U.S. Supreme Court, we have no right to challenge male sexual violence. And a really significant part of the Violence Against Women Act was struck down in 2000 by the Supreme Court without a whimper from women's groups. So when VAWA was passed, we had a right to be free from gender-motivated violence. And that was the most fantastic thing that I had ever seen. Really? We have a right to be free from gender-motivated violence? But no, we actually don't have that right, because that would be beyond Congress's authority to make such a law, because it would just disrupt the patriarchal structure of our society. That was the unwritten part of the decision. The decision was, though, set up by Justice Rehnquist to strike it down. He did years of work preparing the ground so that he could strike it down when it came up, and I could prove that if I had more time. Rehnquist. Okay, so no right to be free from gender-motivated violence, and that case that came to the Supreme Court involved a gang rape. And Rehnquist said no civilized society would deny her a right to redress her case, but not here, not in federal court, because federal court is too important. So she should go back to her local court, and maybe they could do something for her. Okay. In Colorado, one of our states, women had a mandatory right to enforcement of their orders of protection. And the Supreme Court, Justice Scalia, said, oh no, when Colorado passed a law saying that women had a mandatory right to enforcement of their orders of protection, they couldn't have meant it because they didn't know what they were talking about. And he said, Scalia said, I usually defer to states' rights because he's a federalist. So now women can't go to the federal government for protection. So now there was a state government, and he said, I usually adhere to states' rights, but in this case, you can't tell police what to do. Police need discretion to do nothing. And that was the unwritten part. But police need discretion to, in this case, go out to dinner instead of following up when 3 children of Jessica Gonsalves were kidnapped by her estranged husband off of her lawn, and even though Jessica knew exactly where those children were, the police wouldn't go arrest him. He murdered the daughters that night with a gun that he bought that night And he fired on police at 3:20 the next morning, and they fired back. And so it was suicide by cop because the police didn't respond to enforce her order of protection. And now we have no right to enforce her order of protection. So I think we actually still have these rights, but we haven't successfully articulated them yet. When the gang rape case happened here, and there was so much publicity, and there was so much public outcry in the streets, it was actually heartening to me to see how much people in India cared about this, and that they were taking to the streets and lighting candles and calling for reform and paying attention to this issue. And there was, at the same exact time, another gang rape case going on in the States that wasn't receiving any attention hardly at all. And this was football players in a little town called Steubenville, Ohio, where these football players ruled the town. There was nothing going on in the town except high school football. And these guys raped this 16-year-old girl, and they took pictures of it, and they tweeted about it, and one guy even took a video. And the prosecutor met with the girl and her family, and then after getting all of her information and trying to dissuade her from coming forward, because she said, well, you can come forward, but it'll be very hard to prove this case, even though it wouldn't because there was so much social media around it, which is great proof. Then the prosecutor said, oh, I have to recuse myself because my son is on the football team. She's been removed from office. And the coach, the football coach, had told the guys, don't worry about this, nothing will happen. And that's in the tweets. So there are these problems of accountability, and there was hardly any visibility at all until a group called Anonymous got involved, and they went in and found all of the social media evidence that the cops couldn't find, even though they had taken the cell phones. I know how to find this. My students know how to find this. We do investigations in my office, and they find out more about these rape cases. I think I had maybe 3 or 4 gang rape cases this semester that were just like Steubenville. And there's no outcry. But it's not all terrible news yet. I just want to say that one of the comments was, she's deader than Trayvon Martin, about the victim that these guys made. There was a picture that some of you may have seen where they're carrying this woman by her. She looks like she's dead. They're carrying her by her arms and her legs from party to party. Hateful, misogynist comments made over Twitter and the video. And these are civil rights violations. Like, to hate women so much is a civil rights violation. And we should be really thinking about taking very seriously the civil rights of women as we imagine what our vision of justice would be. Law is only a piece of this. The main course that I teach, that I've taught for years at Harvard Law School, is called Gender Violence, Law, and Social Justice. So law is only 1/3 of the whole picture as far as I'm concerned. What I have found is really that female-female alliances are the first and most powerful step. And I was talking to Justice Sethi before this, and we were talking about, are we preaching to the crowd here? Because, to the choir, that we are stronger together whether we like each other or not, and that we have to consciously do the work to stop dividing against each other, to stop dividing among class, sexuality, judgment, caste. We just have to, just respect each other and respect our choices and respect what we wear and not make fun of each other. And we're socialized to do exactly that, to divide against each other. And we're socialized and celebrated for, in a patriarchy, that division. And we have to stop that division. We have to stop dividing against ourselves, and we have to be really loud about it. And this doesn't discount the work of good males who also will stand up against violence against women. But the males can sometimes be like a silent majority. That's how one of my male students described it this semester. He said there are a majority of men who don't abuse, but they're silent. So to all the men in the room, I want you to not be silent anymore. And I'll close with my favorite quote from Frederick Douglass, which is that power concedes nothing without demand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane. We have about 10 minutes left for question and answer, so I will open it up to the floor. We can take some questions from our audience, either to the panel as a whole or to particular speakers. Jackie?
Well, while people are thinking, I just thought I'd start off. First of all, I should just say on behalf of the organizers that we are videoing these proceedings. So if anyone is not, and we are planning to post some of the discussion on the website of the South Asia Institute, which is one of the 3 Harvard sponsors. If anybody is not comfortable with their remarks or their image being posted, then please contact us and we will, of course, respect that. But what I wanted to do actually was to ask you a question, Colin, because I found what you said very provocative. You said, you know, we need to sack at least 50% of the police and then sack them again and sack them again. And my question is really, what do you think that would achieve? Why is sacking the police a good strategy? Why wouldn't you rather say, we need to understand why the police become like that and really address our energies to creating an ethical police force? Why would you put your very limited I mean, we all have very limited advocacy resources into sacking 50% of the police force again and again? And the second part is, you know, what does this tell you? What is your analysis of why, you know, half the Indian police force, in your view, and nobody would be better placed to know this reliably than you, has been so, you know, I think to use Shazia's words, become so depraved or so degraded? I mean, what is your explanation? Because to me it seems nearly like ad hominem, and would like to hear, I'm sure you have an answer, I'd just like to hear some of it.
We have an NHRC report, the National Human Rights Commission report on trafficking, done by a senior police officer, where in that report he says again and again some of the main traffickers of women are policemen. Now, that's one of the few reports that we have in this country. Very few reports really on the conduct of police and so on. Why do I say that we have to sack them and you can't reform them? Because I've seen police training for the last 10 years, and I believe it's a joke. I don't believe you can change the minds of these people. They're hardened criminals of the worst kind. Savage in their treatment of women, disabled persons, slum dwellers, trade unionists, hardened criminals. Why have they become like that? Because they've had 50 years, not 50 years, 30 years. They didn't have this license to kill for the 2 decades after independence. They didn't have that. But they had the license to kill for the last 30 years, 20 years, particularly 20 years, 1990s onwards. They had a license to kill, they had a license to molest, they had a license to do, you know, all kinds of underhand deals. They had a license to smuggle drugs. They had a license to traffic in women. So it's the most savage and brutal force that you can ever imagine. And unless India and the Indian NGOs and the Indian social movements understand that, the trade union movement understands it, the tribal movements understand it, the Dalit movements understand that as clear as day. It's the NGOs who are slightly confused and very, you know, taken up with training and, you know, changing the mindset. And I love this phrase, changing the attitude. It's this middle class NGO notion of what the police force is. I think the common people of India have absolutely no doubt that this force needs to be beaten and kicked out of the force. Absolutely no doubt. So what are we faced with? We are faced with actually a situation where you need social movements bringing about change. It won't happen through change in the law. It won't happen through seminars and workshops. It's not going to happen through gentle methods. It's going to happen through change, fundamental social movement and change. And not just the kind of change we saw in Delhi, but fundamental change where social movements say, we need surgery, not mild medication.
I'd like to add, I think, I'd like to say something in addition to what Colin said. If you read the Burma Committee report, you will find that the cause for that anger is demonstrated at least in 3 very graphic incidents. One is about trafficking of women and children. And the figures which we have published, and these are all figures which nobody was able to refute. 77,133 women missing in 2010. 59,668 missing in 2011. And Mrs. Justice said, Justice Burma and I, we asked the police officers, I said, that you all stand at the railway station, you know that people are trafficked through the rail. That's the best way by which they're all taken. And then they're put in a small slum, 20 of them crowded in a room. And your man gives a tip-off. And they admitted it. The officers of the police admitted that yes, that there is trafficking and it's happening in front of their nose. I'll give you a second instance. We recorded in this report that a PCR van, now a PCR van means a police control room van, which is supposed to be one of these vans which guard people on the road. There were 3 people in a PCR van who picked up a girl, and that girl was wanting to know where to go. And this location is also described in the report. And they take that girl, and there are 2 eyewitnesses. We have recounted the full testimony. They take this girl into a small forest-like area, and they have a syringe. Now that's very important because these policemen also do what's called medical legal cases. So they're friends with doctors. The doctors tell them that, you know, if somebody has got to be made insensate, then what is the kind of injection you need to give? And they inject this girl. And all the 3 policemen rape this girl. And these eyewitnesses, this testimony is put in the report. And the government of India was so embarrassed when they saw this whole thing coming out in a report. Then they said, the Home Minister very, very proudly said, I am going to take action. And what was the action he took? He ordered an inquiry. What was the inquiry which was undertaken? The inquiry which was undertaken is that they wanted to find out who were those 2 boys who deposed before the committee and, if possible, get them beaten. That is what they attempted to do. So I don't think that the comment of Colin is based on anger at all. I think it's based on evidence. And it's not 50% who have to be sacked. And if in a country where police officers are actually, it's not a question of their only acting as some sort of dramatic villains. They are being made to act at the instance of political people. They derive advantages. Every policeman. Imagine, can you imagine about, you talked about the National Human Rights Commission. We had a most outstanding police officer who did work on human trafficking. He was an IPS officer. And he told me that to get a child, a woman rescued from a police station who was trafficked, he had to use all his contacts. And the additional commissioner of police in Delhi said, sir, this is the only time I'll be able to help you to let this girl go. I won't be able to honor a second request. So I think it is completely, and I think the sight of politicians on the television making promises galore is I think it's less said about it, the better. It hardly matters whether they belong to party A or B. They're completely insincere. And you must understand, I must tell you, I did not want to receive an award from the Prime Minister, and I did not attend that function. I want to tell you I felt so angry because they just simply used this report. It is not that they were concerned about implementing the recommendations of this report. They just used the integrity of 3 people who just did public service, let me tell you, if you were to ask me, did the Home Minister or the Home Secretary even read the report? I don't think he even knew what these chapters were. We talked about education in schools, and I wanted to know, what did the Ministry of Human Resource and Development do? They've done very little. We talked about trafficking. We talked about the areas where trafficking is taking place. Can you imagine, it is after this report was published that the Supreme Court of India passed a judicial order that if a child is missing, the police will have to then register an FIR of kidnapping. Why? Because this happened in Netihari. All those parents whose children were buried deep after murder, they went to the police and the police said, we will put you in jail. And it took them 3 months before there could be a breakthrough. I think I'm very sorry to say that that is really, I mean, as a conscientious objector, I'm telling you that it's impossible to believe that although we think positively, we think optimistically, and we are used to platitudes of, economy, and I'm very sorry, I'm glad you mentioned about consumerism, this GDP and the foreign investment, and that's all that you talk about, but we hardly talk about a human violation and the violation of a woman. And what you mentioned about Santosh and his and her niece is the lowest on the priority. It's the lowest on the priority of media. It is lowest on the priority. Flavia is absolutely right. Flavia Agnes is not going to come on the, she's not going to be sought after on the television. But yes, if it is a Bollywood actor who is actually involved in rape, then you will find that there is a whole coverage. The coverage is different. And I think that's a very important issue. These are all structural infirmities which are taking place. And I'm so happy that Diane, I mean, she was so good to share the American experience. And I think this is a wonderful venue where we all have to put our heads together to see that how is it that we're going to, I mean, use this report much better than, let's say, the government did. Of course, people said that, there's a new law, it's the 2013 law. But, well, those of us who are lawyers, we knew what were the loopholes in this amending law, which were deliberately made so that people could just again get away. We talked about voyeurism and stalking, and not a single civil servant even understood what was voyeurism. And you're right, you're talking about sacking of police. What about IAS officers who don't know how to read a report? And if you want to know how actually the bill was even prepared in implementation of this report, you would be shocked. Somebody was asked to do what's called a cut, copy, paste job on a computer, and he produced 3 different versions of the bill, and they floated around. And actually, one person said that let's take the one which is the simplest, which is the least number of amendments.
Mahesh.
It's Mr. Colin Gonzalez. You have provoked us enough, and you cannot overcome violence with violence, as you have been preaching that they need to be bashed up, they need to be, I'm also a civil servant. And in fact, the attitude of the police, it's not that as like all of them are anti-minority, anti-Dalits. They are secular in terms of committing atrocities. It is a fact that they do it to every member of various communities, sections, and society. That is a fact. But do you think that if we have women representation in the police, is it going to become more human? They are as brutal, as corrupt as the men are. Now, you said about your experience in South Africa. I just wanted to know that how they have overcome this institutionalized torture. Is it through affirmative action? What have they done? And just the last point, that our attitude to women is very much rooted in a religion. Like, I'm a Hindu. If you look at the hero of Hindu religion, it's Lord Ram. And what did Lord Ram did to Sita to test her purity? Was not Ravan better? Like, he confined Sita, I don't know, these are all folklores, I don't know. And he did not do anything to Sita. So it's very much part of a psyche, the Hindu psyche, that a woman, is something which is subservient to a man. So I just wanted to know that in South Africa, how they have overcome this, how they have reduced this kind of institutionalized torture.
I'm taking up too much time.
Parek, in fact, the question is about how do we change the mindset. When a girl child is born, even before she is born, of course, they try to have no entry for her. But after she is born, the parents also will discriminate between the boy child and the girl child. Food, clothing, education. Because the girl is a pariah dhan, she's going to go away somewhere, and only son can send us to heaven, the daughter can't send us to heaven. Now, all this is inbuilt in this system and in the mindset. Now, how do we change? Forget, of course, I'm talking of your own parents' house. From day one, there is a discrimination. Why should you send a girl for education? And it's not only confined to people, it's confined to all over and in all strata of society. Now, how do we change this, and how do we, because this is most important. Unless you do that, all these reforms are not going to help us.
What Colin has said is correct about the attitude of the police. But Colin, I want to know, sack them, bash them up, okay. Who do you put in their place? You must think of that. That's also important. And you can't be so pessimistic, no, training won't make any difference. And I don't think it's correct to have this wholesome condemnation of the police force. Of course there is corruption, of course the way they behave, we know that. There is no sensitivity at all. That is apparent when a woman goes to register a FIR, she's mocked at. But the thing is, you said about the problem. But by sacking them and bashing them, you haven't solved the problem. There has to be some police commissioner, there have to be some police people. Will you take the job of police commissioner as a matter of public service? We'll be very happy. What I'm trying to say is that vacuum has to be filled. So let's have a constructive suggestion in that direction.
I think the point which Soli makes is absolutely valid, but it's not that policemen and police officers always have been of this very regressive and, shall we say, downcast nature. Now let me give you an example, because I've dealt with these organizations. The first director of the CBI was a man called C.V. Narasimhan. He never violated the law. He was firm with the Prime Minister, he was firm with the ministers, and you would be surprised to know that his children could not use even his official resources of a car. A T.N. Chaturvedi, who was a Home Secretary to the Government of India, who later became the governor, he could not send his child to Cambridge because he didn't have money. He just couldn't afford to send his child for education abroad. We have had police officers. We had a police officer called Rajagopal in Delhi, Commissioner of Police in Delhi, who would not obey an illegal order. So we have had outstanding police officers. Yes, Rustamji. Even a person like Vijay Ramarao was a person who ensured that no person could be proceeded against or prosecuted merely because he happened to be some political party or a political opponent, and so on and so forth. But now what has happened is that if police officers are really the instrumentalities, not as public servants, but they happen to be the underlings of political masters, they are there a dual role. For the outside world, they're maintaining law and order and law. But their real role, their real conscience is not their conscience at all. It is the dictate of what a political master says. And once you get used into it, you will find that there is no stopping it. I'll give you one example of an encounter. This death of Sohrabuddin. You'll be surprised to know it was discovered by accident. It was discovered purely by accident. it so happened that a judge asked me when I was sitting in court that, will you please give some help in this matter and look into the papers? I hardly knew what this was all about. I just saw that there was a one-page complaint. But then I saw somewhere at the bottom that there was a complaint which had been made to the Chief Justice of India. And I had found that that was buried for almost about 2 years. And I found from the correspondence, the shifting stands which were taken, I already smelt murder. And I reported murder, and ultimately they found it was murder. But who were all involved in the murder? It's not just police officers of one state. Police officers of state A, state B, state C, state D. Now you would wonder, what is so extraordinarily special or evil? This is not even Osama bin Laden. That you need police officers, IPS officers of 4 different states to be involved in his murder. And that is when it struck me that there is a distinct possibility that there is a certain kind of an alternative evil activity which goes, shall we say, which gets legitimated in the name of murder of a terrorist, in the name of a murder of somebody coming from Pakistan and blah blah. But this is indeed a matter of grave concern. What Colin says is a matter of grave concern. But if you do sack 50% of people, I promise you that if you have a law by which you give autonomy to police officers to function properly, and you have a police commission to whom they are accountable, not to political masters, take it from me, you will have 50% ready to join the service.
It's to do more with the integrity of a civil servant. You named couple of CBI officers. You named couple of IPS officers. They were very honest, known for integrity and character. Did they enjoy the autonomy? They enjoyed the same functioning with vis-a-vis other corrupt bureaucrats within the same structure. So what is more important is the integrity of an officer, of an individual officer. If you give him autonomy and if he's corrupt, that is far more dangerous than not giving him autonomy.
We take the next question, Ruchira.
Thank you. Actually, I was deeply moved by Shazia, Flavia, Colin, and of course Gopal talking so eloquently about trafficking, and that it's tied into police reform. But as an anti-trafficking activist, I just wanted to put 2 issues on the table, because today we are talking about law and law enforcement. One is that, the first and most important thing for any victim or survivor is that she has to be able to understand the law. And right now the law itself is such a hodgepodge, and it's all over the place, and Aam Admi and an Akhri Aurat can certainly not understand the law, nor can a frontline social worker. So we need simplification of the law, we need rationalization of the law. Even the trafficking law, for example. Now we have section 370 in the Criminal Law Amendment Act, but ITPA has not been rationalized. And so there are all kinds of regressive clauses in ITPA which actually go against the women, like Section 8. And there is no rehabilitation packages. So unless services kick in, victims cannot come forward and become survivors. So we really need to see how these laws can be simplified and rationalized as part of law reform. And the second thing is that police reform. Now, police accountability, which Colin was talking about, is so important in police reform, because as you remember, in America there was something called the Knapp Commission, and when people wanted prostitutes or drugs, they would actually go to the police and say that, can you find us some? And the situation is as bad here now. Unless we have accountability, and I have been dealing with a corrupt police officer in Bihar, and the matter has gone up all the way to National Human Rights Commission, and the officer has actually got promoted and become the ADC to the governor of Bihar, even though all the evidence has gone against him. And an internal departmental inquiry has also said that he arrested one of our activists wrongly, who had actually complained against traffickers. So instead of arresting the traffickers, he arrested our activist. And so this is so entrenched, and nothing can be done without police reform and police accountability. But how is that police accountability to be formulated is really important, because how do we bash this person who is corrupt? Who does the inquiry? What kind of punishment is there after the inquiry? These are the things we have to think about to take this forward.
Okay, I think we have time for...
What did NHRC do?
They just sent us a letter back saying that the matter is closed because there was a case registered against our activist, which was by a woman, and they didn't even bother to say that the investigation was wrong. The name of the activist was wrong, everything we had given evidence about it, etc., but they did not bother to look at that. They didn't even read our complaint, they just arbitrarily closed the case. And Dr. P.M. Nair was helping us, the same person, and the case that you spoke about, where he had to call up the additional police commissioner, was for one of our girls.
That's right.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question, or the gentleman in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Abhishek Tiwari. I was the counsel to the Marwah committee. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
We can't hear you. Take the mic.
Obviously, police reform was something which, when we were sort of discussing within the committee how to deal with police reform, it started out with, should we just keep it to Prakash Singh? And, what happened to the Prakash Singh judgment? The Supreme Court is still trying to implement the Prakash Singh judgment. And then, of course, we said, let's call some senior police officers, speak to them. Let's call some ex-police officers and speak with them as well. Some of them were very helpful. In fact, they sat with us for days. Some of them came to us very hesitantly and said, we'd appreciate it if you didn't quote us or didn't name us in the report. And we said, obviously, we'll keep it confidential. But the primary feedback which we got from most of them, at least, was that yes, I wouldn't say 50%, nobody gave us a figure, but a large percentage of the police force in India needs to be chucked out, needs to be disciplined. I wouldn't say bashed, but definitely needs a strong hand to get them to do the job they're supposed to be doing. Yes, the police are involved in trafficking, the police are involved in prostitution, the police look the other way. Even, policemen who are honest and who want to make a change also often either voluntarily or are forced to look the other way. The obvious question was, so how do you deal with it? Forget Prakash Singh. Keep that aside. On a practical ground level, how do you deal with it? Throwing out 50% of the police force, and this is something which we did debate a lot, is not going to work. For the obvious reason, who do you put in their place? Right? You can't enforce law and order with half your police force. Right? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Who knows? But let's say I have 100 policemen in Delhi today, just hypothetically. I can't throw away 50 of them in one shot. Why? Because to train a constable takes 2 years. This is what we've been told. To fully train a constable from being a fresh recruit to somebody who can join the force takes between 1.5 years to 2 years. And it's a little less time for somebody like a home guard or a civil defense volunteer. So clearly, if I want to replace 50% of my force, I will need, effectively, for a city like Delhi, I will need 15 years to replace 50% of my force. Given the resources I have in my command, right? So throwing away 50% of my force is not going to work. The other big problem is, even if I chuck out 50% of my force, I throw out 100% of my force, where will the replacements come from? I'm not talking about senior level officers. I'm not talking about inspector upwards. I'm talking about the constabulary, the hawaldars. What's the source of these hawaldars and the constabulary today? They don't come from well-educated backgrounds. In fact, a large majority of them come from villages and small towns where they have grown up seeing their fathers beating up their mothers, where they have seen other policemen beating up their fathers. So a lot of the anger, a lot of the brutality shown by police today is also a direct result of, because they feel this happened to my parents, and therefore I will become a police officer and do it to somebody else.
Yeah, even I want to say something. I don't think it's as insurmountable as you make it out to be. One, when you look at training, promotion, recruitment, administration, financial control of police, I'm sure you can work it out. If you look at UP, for instance, Mulayam Singh ensured that the bhartis, the police mein jo bharti hoti hai, wo Yadav ki hai. So if you depoliticize and take away the stranglehold of the politicians from the police, a lot of things will change. Also the training, sensitization, not ever since the Nirbhaya rape, we don't know of a single instance where even the Delhi police was trained, sensitized. Who is training them? What do they know about? Even the curriculum can be changed to some extent. So there are a lot of answers to that. So I think there are a lot of honest, good people out there who can learn.
There was a sensitization
and we can evolve a system.
Which was
And also we should not depend on the integrity of one officer or two, but on systemic reform.
Right. So
It can't be as whimsical and arbitrary as that. It has to be a systematic reform,
Yes.
when the institutions speak for themselves and not change or alter their character because of the officer heading them.
I just want to come in here for a minute, and I want to say that you need systems of accountability which we don't have. I disagree with Colin to the extent of like 50% you throw out or something will change. I don't agree with that. I also do not think that women will coming in and going to change the system. I just do not, even if the Dalit women, Muslim women, whatever, I do not think that's going to change. What we are lacking, of course the political influence is one thing, the systems of accountability. If I go and train a group of 50 policemen about something, then I should have the authority to say where my training has gone, and if they do not follow this training, then what are the measures that are built in immediately. Otherwise, I do not want to go for the training because it is a mockery, it is a waste of my time. And as I've written in my article in Tehelka, that there's no NGO worth its grain which has not done police trainings. But our whole idea of the training is faulty. What are we training? Why are we training? You go and preach some lofty ideals. Police should treat women well. Police should do this. That's not the type of thing they have to do. What they have to do is, this is the law, this is the POXO Act, this is the Criminal Law Amendment, and you do this. And if you do not do this, then this is going to happen. Every time we go for a training and I speak, after me, one senior police officer speaks, ridiculing everything that I say. And for this, crores of money has gone down the drain, because there cannot be a training when is all the time you're getting opposing messages. There has to be one curriculum, one agenda, and you train 50 people, you train 100 people. Okay, we'll have monitoring systems. I am not as dismissive like Colin of middle class NGO engagement, which you and me are both NGO and middle class and whatever, and mainstream lawyers. So if you think you have a role to play, I think I have a role to play, and maybe 10 or 20 or 30 people in this room say they have a role to play. And what is that role? I think we have to be much more clear and articulate. What do we want? You give me 50 officers, I will train, I will monitor, I will do everything. And then if they do not follow, then there has to be systems. Now all the senior officers, police commissioners, so and so said, yes, we want change, please help us. Then will you do what we tell you? We will not do, because that is not the system that will work for you. So how do we do that? If we crack that system and 50% have to go, 50% will have to go. But then, of course, what you say, who is the next person who is going to come in? If this is the power structure under which you are operating, next person will be taught the same thing. How to be brutal, how to control women, how to do trafficking, how to earn your money, how to be corrupt, how to please the political bosses. How do we train? What are we going to train? But so that next lot comes in differently. It is not possible in this system, and we need to work very small measures within the system, and maybe something will change.
But Flavia, can I say something? Okay.
Well, it's almost 9 o'clock.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
all right.
One last question.
Well, I'd like to ask a question after that, if I might.
Oh my God, now we can't. I think we have to limit it to maybe one last question, if you don't mind. Yeah.
young woman back there.
Okay. All right, and then I'll come to you. Maybe the last two questions.
Aparna, I have one.
This is less a question than just a comment following up to the discussion about sensitization training. There's an anti-trafficking NGO in Hyderabad called Prajwala. I think many of you might be familiar with it. They do police sensitization. Oh, thank you. And I was fortunate enough to visit and hear them speak about their program, and they've done very comprehensive training on about 200 police officers, and what they found is that the officers, post-training, really understand what the girls that they rescue are going through, and understand to the point that they're human beings, that they, go in and bring the girls' belongings with them, which is just a small, measure of evidence that they actually understand that the girls they rescue are human beings with possessions, with valuable, things that you don't think that, girls who are trafficked into prostitution would have belongings that they want to take with them. But I just think that that's a point of evidence that should be kept in mind. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one last question, the lady in front.
Yeah. Colin, you probably made one big mistake today in saying 50%. But if there were examples set for some or the police people to persons to be sacked when they are found to be even under public pressure. So instead of saying, let's hang them, which is what we have to get our young people away from, or people who are demonstrating away from saying that, can we not start and have huge movements and pressure, including, I don't know whether the case of the Delhi Police Commissioner was fit to be sacked or not. I'm not passing any comment on that. But if it was, why don't we work with the movements to say, sack them and put pressure on the politicians? Won't that be different? And finally, the last suggestion, what if the ongoing cases and the registration, everything had to be electronic and public? Won't that change in terms of the transparency that you were talking about?
To have results, otherwise we will not do training.
Trainings, most NGOs who've done trainings, Flavia, have said, and there's evaluations that it hasn't worked. NGOs that have trained police officers today say they will not do it again, majority of them.
Same as with judicial training. Go to Bhopal, go to Uttan, same story.
Nobody wants to train IS officers either today in the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy. Earlier, NGOs used to go running. Today, people look down upon going because it's not worth it.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick observation to make.
Just one thing to what Mr. Tiwari said, because it's not just people in villages and poor people who are beating their wives. And the culture is being created right at the top. So, every time we've been talking, the whole debate this evening has been that people in slums are beating their wives, or people in villages are beating their wives. And in my own work, I've found that child sexual abuse and domestic violence begins in the richest of families, and in the most poshest of houses in Delhi and Bombay. And it's hardest to get after them because they have the most connections with the police. So we also have to think about reforming, and how do we get past this is only through police accountability.
No, but
police accountability will mean that we have to change the systems that police are investigated under, that it cannot be an internal departmental inquiry. It has to be an independent inquiry. And the Badal Commission thing is giving more power to the police, not less power.
I'm sorry, just one observation I would have to make.
Okay, this is getting out of control.
Yeah, we really need to close up the session. It's 9 o'clock and we are
I just have to make a final observation, because I'm getting very concerned about how everybody here is shifting the onus of reform entirely upon implementation. And that concerns me, because I know that the parliament is a representative body and it represents the conservative worst of our society. So if we are looking to them for all sorts of reform, and if we think the reform's really going to come from the parliament, then we have people who are elected, like we received a number of statements while working on the committee of politicians who have the most ridiculous idea of how reform really works. So for instance, Om Prakash Chautala said, my way of dealing with female crime against women is to reduce the age of marriage and legitimize child marriage. So I'm getting a little concerned about how we expect the police and the bureaucracy and the executive to carry forward this entire process, while these people are actually a product and members of the society and the culture which sort of preserves these social hierarchies. So to ever be able to counter the social hierarchies, we have to engage with religious groups, with caste issues, political parties are fighting on the lines of caste. So we can't expect them to abandon that caste identity. But we have to engage not just in terms of reform from above, but people of influence who can influence religious communities, who can influence Dalit leaders, the reform has to come from within a society as opposed to creating a system and expecting a society to abide by it.
Okay, that's a perfect segue into the next two parts of the conference, because this is just law and law reform. And we have a saying that the fish rots from the head. And our experience in the States, at least, is that police offices, the chief makes a huge difference, but also the law makes a big difference. And when they're subject to liability and accountability, that's what really makes the difference in police reform. And there are some good programs that we can talk about tomorrow. So tomorrow, we're talking about good practices, so that we're not ending this discussion. This is a very, very important and vibrant discussion, and we appreciate deeply everybody's contribution. I was also thinking that we should have comments open, so that there's a place to submit comments in case you have more questions, or when we publish the material, you'll have a chance to read it and think about it, and that we'll have an ongoing discourse about this. And now, Aparna will close.
Yeah, I'd like to...
Arranging this, because this has really resulted in knowing different points of view, from Colin's bashing to the other thing.
Yeah,
but it is important for us to really think about this, not go home and forget it. This must really worry us, bother us. And thank you, all the Harvard faculty and Aparna, for excellent work you have done. I won't stand in the way of you in the dinner now, which is getting cold, and we'll meet tomorrow morning, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to thank all my panelists and the audience, and for focusing on police and police reforms, which I was hoping would be the focus of this discussion. I only would like to point out that we have the head of the committee on police reforms with us, Mr. Sorabji, and I think we have some homework cut out that we should read the earlier report, see those concepts, and examine it in depth. I think that is an academic exercise that we should undertake. Thank you all.